You are about to walk into your Viva room. The examiner looks up and asks, "Tell me about the neuromuscular junction in Myasthenia Gravis." You start talking about acetylcholine. You explain the NMJ. You're doing well. Then they ask, "So will neostigmine work in this patient or not?" And you freeze because suddenly you're not sure. The drug that reverses muscle relaxants, does it help or hurt someone who already has too much acetylcholine sitting around? Most residents get this completely wrong. Some say yes, some say no, and neither can explain why. Let's fix that. Let's start with what the examiner is actually testing when they ask about the physiology. They are not asking you to recite the NMJ. They want to know if you understand the mechanism of the disease. Because everything else, every drug decision, every airway decision flows from it. Myasthenia gravis is an autoimmune disease. Autoantibodies are produced against the postsynaptic acetylcholine receptors, specifically the nicotinic receptors at the NMJ. These antibodies block the receptors, cause complement mediated destruction, and reduce the number of functional receptors available. The muscle gets the signal, but nobody is listening. That is the core defect. Say exactly this if they ask you to summarize the pathophysiology. In Myasthenia gravis, IgG antibodies target the nicotinic acetylcholine receptors on the postsynaptic membrane, reducing the number of functional receptors. Acetylcholine is released normally. The problem is receptor availability, not transmitter release. And that one sentence separates a prepared candidate from an average one. The examiner will nod and never say acetylcholine is reduced in myasthenia gravis. That is Lambert Eaton and not myasthenia. Confusing these two is one of the most expensive mistakes you can make in a Viva. Now, the scenario question, and this is the one that makes you sweat. The examiner says, "Your myasthenia gravis patient has undergone a thymectomy. In the recovery room, they are not breathing adequately. Saturations are falling. What do you do?" This is a crisis scenario. They want you to think on your feet, but more importantly, they want to see if you know the difference between two completely different causes of post-op respiratory failure in myasthenia. There is myasthenia crisis, inadequate disease control, meaning too little acetylcholine effect at the receptor. And there is cholinergic crisis, too much anticholinesterase medication, meaning excessive acetylcholine causing depolarization block, muscle fasciculations, bradycardia, secretions. The treatment is opposite. Say exactly this: "Before I intervene pharmacologically, I need to determine whether this is a myasthenic crisis or a cholinergic crisis. Because the treatment is diametrically opposite, I would assess for the SLUD features: salivation, lacrimation, urination, and defecation. Books suggest cholinergic excess. If those are absent and the patient has been under medicated, I would support ventilation and consider IV pyridostigmine cautiously. If cholinergic crisis is suspected, I would withhold anticholinesterases and support ventilation. Secure the airway first. Always say that. Never say I'll give neostigmine to reverse it. Without this distinction, that one sentence could cost you marks on the entire scenario." Drug choices and technique. The examiner will ask, "Why does your choice of muscle relaxant matter in myasthenia?" Here is where the mechanism wins marks. These patients are already resistant to depolarizing agents and hypersensitive to non-depolarizing agents. Why? Because they have fewer functional receptors. For succinylcholine to work, it needs to occupy enough receptors to cause depolarization. With fewer receptors, you need a higher dose, so succinylcholine is relatively resistant. For non-depolarizing agents, even a small dose blocks a significant proportion of the already reduced receptor pool, so they are exquisitely sensitive. The dose requirement for vecuronium or rocuronium may be a fraction of what you'd normally use. Say exactly this when the examiner asks. In myasthenia gravis, I prefer to avoid muscle relaxants altogether wherever possible, and I rely on deep inhalational anesthesia or regional techniques. If I must use a relaxant, I would use the smallest effective dose of the short acting non depolarizing agent under continuous neuromuscular monitoring, targeting a TOF ratio greater than zero point 0.9 before extubation. This shows you understand the physiology, the pharmacology, and the safety endpoint, all in one answer. For inhalational agents, sevoflurane itself has some neuromuscular blocking properties which compounds the sensitivity. Mention that. The examiner will be impressed. Now, the trap question, and this is where standard teaching from another topic actively hurts you. The question goes, can you use Sugamadex in myasthenia gravis? Most candidates who know about Sugamadex say yes, because Sugamadex encapsulates rocuronium and reverses it regardless of the clinical state. That part is true, but here is the trap. Sugamadex does not assess neuromuscular recovery. It chemically removes the drug. What's left behind is a patient with the underlying myasthenia gravis related receptor deficit who may still be functionally weak even after adequate reversal. Never say Sugamadex is a perfect solution in MG because it guarantees full reversal. Instead, say Sugamadex reliably reverses pharmacological block from rocuronium, but the residual weakness from the disease itself remains. Clinical assessment and quantitative neuromuscular monitoring are still mandatory before extubation. This shows you understand the difference between the drug induced block and the disease induced block. That distinction is examiner goal. Investigations and associations. The examiner will ask you what you do preoperatively. Don't just list tests, know why. Pulmonary function tests, because respiratory muscle weakness affects the ability to wean postoperatively. FVC less than 2.9 liters or FEV1 less than 1 liter predicts post-op ventilation. Thyroid function, because myasthenia gravis is associated with autoimmune thyroid disease. 2D echo, because MG can coexist with thymoma and thymoma can compress the mediastinal structures or cause pericardial involvement. Check anticholinesterase dose and last intake. You need to know if they are optimized or over medicated going into the theater. Associated conditions to know: rheumatoid arthritis, SLE, pernicious anemia, type 1 diabetes, MG clusters with all autoimmune diseases. Thymoma is present in about 10 to 15% of patients, and the examiner loves asking this. Know the Osserman classification. It shows you have gone beyond the textbook. Complications and management. Postoperative ventilation. When do you plan for it? The classic predictors are the Leventhal criteria: disease duration more than 6 years, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, pyridostigmine dose greater than 750 per day, and intraoperative blood loss greater than 1 liter. Any one of these should make you plan for post-op ventilation upfront. Have that conversation before surgery. If the patient develops acute respiratory failure in the ward, the approach is call for help, support ventilation with bag mask or NIV if appropriate, identify crisis type, and prepare for intubation with a plan that does not worsen the neuromuscular status. Avoid magnesium. It inhibits acetylcholine release and can precipitate crisis. Avoid aminoglycosides. They have NMJ blocking properties. These drug interactions are frequently asked in the Viva. Never say I'll use gentamicin for post-op infection without flagging the interaction. The long-term question. This is where the clinical maturity shows. The examiner asks, the patient is doing well. What is your post-operative plan? You talk about timing of restart of pyridostigmine. This should happen as soon as the patient can swallow. If they can't, IV pyridostigmine is used at 1/30th of the oral dose. You ensure neurology is involved for ongoing immunotherapy decisions, steroids, azathioprine, mycophenolate, plasmapheresis or IVIG may have been used preoperatively to optimize the patient, and the effects last 2 to 4 weeks. Long-term thymectomy offers remission in a significant proportion of the patients, particularly those with early onset non-thymomatous myasthenia gravis. Knowing this shows you understand the disease beyond the operation. 3 things to take into the exam hall. 1. Know the mechanism cold. Myasthenia gravis is receptor loss, not transmitter loss. Lambert-Eaton is the opposite. 2. Always distinguish myasthenic from the cholinergic crisis before you touch a drug. And number 3. Muscle relaxants are optional in myasthenia gravis. If you use them, use the least you need and monitor obsessively. That's it. You know this. Walk in there and show them. If this helped you, hit like and subscribe to Anesthesia Notes. Next episode, we are tackling pheochromocytoma, the one topic where the wrong drug in the wrong order can kill the patient in the Viva and in real life. Don't miss it. I'll see you in the next video.